We are live. Welcome, everyone, to another Street Entrepreneurs Workshop. Today, we're going to be talking about building a thesis, and we're going to be doing that from a very economic perspective. This workshop is really in demand. I get a lot of questions about how to build an economic model. What do I need to know if I'm speaking with investors? What numbers do I need to know? And what are investors looking for? And also, we hear from a lot of people who want to hear from entrepreneurs, their successes and their failures. And we are happy to have with us today Jim, James, and Jeff, who will be answering these questions. So Jim, you will be talking to us from your personal experience and your failures. So I'm really thankful that you're here and you will be sharing that. Before we get started, let's do some quick introductions. Jim, do you want to kick us off?
I would be happy to. One thing I would like to tell the audience is we would like to make sure you're a voice in the room as we talk. So please put your questions out there. Juliana's going to collect those and then ask them as we go along. And we hope to, we think we can have a much better discussion if we know who we're talking to. And my name is Jim Dunn. I'm currently in Colorado, but I lived in the DC, Northern Virginia area for about 20 years. And I have a company called D Partners. And what we do is we create investment thesis primarily for equity partners. And I have a small team of people. Whoops, I heard something. Can you guys hear me fine, Juliana?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. And then we look for areas where there might be problems, where we can solve them, and we're passionate about it. And then we try to find organizations that we can go in and transform to serve that need. So quick and dirty, that's about me. But the most important people here really have to be you. So I tried to bring in a couple other folks that have a different perspective, right? So that when we look at something like this, we can put on a different lens. And I'll let them introduce themselves. James, you want to go ahead?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is James Dunn. I'm actually out of the Hampton Roads, Virginia area, and I'm active duty Air Force on my 13th year active duty. My main job day to day is a deputy division chief for the Acquisition Management and Integration Center. So we do government acquisitions and contracting, and work extensively with small businesses and small startup businesses. So part of the perspective I hope to bring to this discussion is how some of that communication and conversation looks like pitches to a large entity like the government. So thank you.
Okay. And Jeff.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jeff Parkinson. I have been the managing director of a early stage venture capital fund called KEC Ventures out of New York for about the last 10 years. And I've recently moved back to Colorado. This is where I grew up, but still running that fund. We focus on really early stage software companies, generally in the seed Series A stage, and invest about 50-50 into direct-to-consumer companies and B2B software / enterprise companies.
And Jeff, you have some ties to the region as well.
Yeah, so I grew up here into the DC area. So like I said, grew up in Colorado, went down to Texas for a while, and then Chicago, and ultimately ended up in Charlottesville and did my MBA at Darden and finished that up in 2010.
Yep, that's great. So when Julia gets on, we'll introduce her. And by the way, this is the first time most of us have used this service. So if there's a technical difficulty, please try to bring it to our attention as well, so that we can adjust. So again, for the audience here, what we're trying to do is do a case study. When I originally met with Juliana and she's twisting my arm to do something like this, she says, "Can you talk about your failures?" So this is a true case study. that I lived personally, and I think a lot of the problems we had and a lot of the issues that came about and a lot of the reasons why it didn't succeed was due to the fact that we didn't tell the story very effectively. So I'm going to go. I'll start through it. So we're going to give you a case study. Basically, we're going to tell. We're going to encourage you to tell your story in a better way. And hopefully we're going to end up giving you some things that we think are helpful, like how do you develop an economic model, or what's the minimum economic model you might have, the value of market research, and maybe some areas to go out and find some of the information you need to make your thought, make your idea successful. And then hopefully if Julia joins us, we'll be able to do a pitch. And again, we're not here to judge her. We're here to basically embrace her courage to be able to do this as a founder who's putting together an idea now, putting together a team, and figuring out what direction, and then ultimately we'll be talking to investors. So the case study, and I call it Chinook Seafood's a concept. And so when I was a young man, I would put my way through college as a commercial fisherman in Alaska. And I thought I knew everything about fish. And so I loved the product. And what fascinated me when you're up in Alaska and you're fishing with all this great product and this chasing your dream was the fact that most of this product did not go to the United States. It did not end up on our plates. It ended up in Japan, where there was a big auction. It ended up in Korea. It ended up in Norway. It ended up in places where they appreciate fish to a much deeper level than we did. So I had come back. I was in undergrad at the University of Denver and had decided, hey, maybe I can start a business and we can start to bring some of this product to Colorado and create a unique experience so people would buy more of this and they would have the same love and passion for the product as I did. So I did know a little bit about the supply chain. I had been a foreman of a processing plant in Southeast Alaska. We knew the fishermen. I had run the processing plant, and the state of Alaska that year was subsidizing shipping on fresh fish being shipped down to the lower 48. Why were they doing that? They were doing that because they wanted to build a better relationship with the product with U.S. people. And so we thought, hey, what a great opportunity. We'll start shipping it down. So didn't have a great plan, but we thought, hey, what we'll do is we're going to, first of all, we did a little research in Denver, not a great amount of research, but a little bit. And we found out Denver had one of the highest restaurants per capita of anywhere in the nation. And it was considered a very sophisticated seafood marketplace. And we're going, now, how the heck did that happen? Well, for those of us who are here, we know that every year there's a huge influx of new people, a lot of young people, and they come from all the United States. So part of the reason we're a sophisticated market is we have people from the East Coast and the West Coast. And so we have a high degree of restaurants. People appreciate fish. Seemed like a great marketplace. So we created our own little, before they called them food trucks, but our own little food truck. We added refrigeration. We built it out so that a chef could step on board and they could go to the different bins and look at the product and smell it and touch it and feel it like chefs do. And then buy, after they got used to it, they would buy it and then serve it to their population. So we thought it was a great idea. Was the supply chain unique? Was this a supply chain company? Was this a fish wholesaler? We didn't define it, which is probably one of the problems we had. But ultimately, we wanted a great dining experience. And we thought if we're selling to the restaurants or we're selling to the grocery stores, they would buy the biggest amount of it. So that's why we targeted them. And we had no relationship with the buyers in here, which we probably could have benefited from. But we were young and dumb. But the other thing is we started this all with just a little bit of cash that we had earned that last summer. So I'm going to stop there and just ask, my team, because I can't see anything when I'm looking at the PowerPoint. Can you guys hear me? Can you see me? Is somebody going to interrupt me if you think we need a better experience? Any questions at this point?
Everything looks great and everything sounds great.
Okay, good. Thank you. So we failed miserably. And when I say failed, we had fun. It ran for less than a year before we ran out of money to run the business. And there was, I probably don't have enough pages in a PowerPoint to list all the reasons, but we kind of grouped some really large reasons why we did fail. And I'll start with one of the most important ones. We did not have a written business plan, right? I think we kind of wrote parts of it down from time to time, but really this was based on our gut feel. And again, I thought I was very worldly, but my worldview was very small when you look at putting a business together. So could have benefited a ton from having a larger relationship with so many of the stakeholders that could have helped me be successful. We didn't have regular measurement to say, hey, do we have the right processes and how do we evolve this business? We did a lot of this just on our own and our own energy. We didn't have trusted advisors. I did hire, when I incorporated, I did hire an attorney, but it wasn't an attorney that necessarily was a big business attorney or anything else. And there were so many people I didn't understand. Did I understand why a restaurant makes a decision on who to buy from, what kind of margins they're used to working on, how important that supply is? We had no clue into that, other than we drove a truck around and asked people to come and look at our stuff. We certainly could have benefited from, we had limited investment. We did our own, but I think as we go through this, you get a lot more typically from an investor than just some cash to help you. I think Jeff sits on boards now. I sit on some boards now, and part of why you have a board member is to educate you, to hold you accountable, to ask hard questions, to make sure that you have the cash needed to run the business. We didn't have any contracts that showed commitment from both sides. So one of the best ways to get money, I think we'll talk about it in the future here, is going to be from customers. If you have paying customers that pay on time, that's the best way to raise money, right? It proves your concept. You've got the cash to keep the business running. And you as the founder retain more of the control and ownership of that. But we didn't necessarily have those relationships with anybody. So a restaurant could buy from us this week, and if they didn't want to buy from us next week, there was nothing that would help us out. So we didn't have a defensible strategy. We did find out there's lots of competition and well-funded competition from big companies that was serving the restaurant trade. It's a very difficult world to supply and to build a relationship with. And long story short, after this failed, I actually went to work for one of the competitors. I'd go in every morning and I'd buy all the fresh fish. I'd bring it in, had a team of people cut it up. We would deliver it to the restaurants. And when I was going to grad school, that's how I earned money to go to grad school. So when I went to school and I went down and sat in class, I sat in the back row because I smelled like fish, and which was unique in Denver. We on the pricing side of it, and when we talk about our economic model, we can talk a little bit about that. We hadn't really thought that through either, but our pricing out of the chutes was based on a government subsidy for that shipping. So what we didn't think through is, hey, they're not going to do this forever. So if this goes away in 6 months, where does that extra cost go? Does it go against us and against our margin? Are the chefs going to be willing to pay that extra amount and pass it on to their customers? There was really no discussion whatsoever. So ultimately, a government subsidy has things you have to think through on it. as any fish product or consumable or ag product, it's a seasonal product. So how do you support yourselves when your main product may not be available? Which is always a fun one in the ag world or in the restaurant world, especially today's world. So the other part of it was this product, like many ag products, was highly perishable. So what most people don't realize is if I buy a fish today and I buy 10 pounds of it, tomorrow it's going to be less than 10 pounds because it will shrink no matter how you take care of it. So there's an automatic shrinkage to that. So is that built into your price and your margin and things like that? So there was hundreds of little things like this that were very unique to the business and unique to us. And ultimately, we did fail. And we said, hey, I don't have the cash I don't see a way to making a profit here. Everything's cost me a lot of money. It's probably good to close it down and focus on other activities we got going there. So I'm going to stop here on this slide and see if we have any questions yet. And this is our basic case study we wanted to talk about. And from here, before we move on, let's just stop there and see if there's any questions.
So I hear that there were a lot of risks that you didn't necessarily foresee. Is there a way you could have tested your business in retrospect to maybe see some of the potential risks you didn't quite measure until you got into it?
Yeah, as unique as we thought, that's a great question, Juliana. As unique as we thought our business was, it wasn't that unique. And I think just talking to a butcher or other folks that were they would help us identify that risk. And I do think there's also today, and one of the things that will pop up in the bottom of this is some local, some government resources that help you put together a plan and also help you identify risk in your area. And then there's also a huge amount of market information you can go out and is typically available, and that will guide you through where some of these risks are and how some of these businesses have circumvented some of that. And then I think another way to help there is to find that best of breed company that you might be able to also base your processes and your thing, a lot of your plan on. And then also, just importantly, have a good team around you and listen to them, because they will help you identify risks. They'll help you identify solutions to that risk, and they'll help you, in so many different ways.
Awesome.
Hey, Jim or Juliana, I'm happy to chime in here with just a thought if you guys want. So you'll hear from the venture capital world all the time as you go out to pitch these two notions that are basically the two things every VC will start with before they even decide. If you don't pass these two, the next 30, 45 minutes of your pitch really aren't getting listened to because it's already dead. And that's this notion of founder market fit and product market fit. And when I look at this, Jim, you had really good founder market fit. There was, you'd experienced something in the area, you kind of understood it, and it was passionate to you. People try to suss out founder market fit because they want to understand when you get punched in the gut about 14 times as a founder, right? Can you keep moving on? And is this a passion thing for you? Or were you just somebody who said, hey, I'd like to go start a business, kind of looked around and picked something, right? Those are two very different things. Seems to me the part that you got wrong the first time, and a lot of founders get wrong the first time and they just do a much better job of it. The second time is this notion of product market fit. And I see every time I have a founder who's either been successful or failed come back, the amount of testing that they do on their market before they say, I'm going to dedicate, potentially 10 plus years of my life and all the opportunity costs that I'm giving up by being a founder and so forth to this thing. They're going to go out and they're going to spend a lot of time testing this market, and they're going to be as sure as one can be from conversations and so forth to to that this thing has a good chance of working, and at least the first steps. And I think for anybody pitching, whether it's an angel investor, whether it's a VC or anybody else, those two aspects of your pitch better be point on, because we can all figure out unit economics and scalability and all that kind of stuff down the line. And everybody kind of knows how over time you can get advice to build that up, but you can't replicate founder market fit and product market fit on on a slide deck and so forth.
That's very good. Anybody else? All right. So, oops. So just to kind of pull this all together. So we had an original thesis, and again, there was a lot of passion in that, and I appreciate what Jeff said. He's exactly right. And the other part of it is, if I pitch this to somebody like Jeff, and Jeff had decided to assist me, he's not just assisting me with money. He's assisting me with criteria, with challenges, so that I have a better idea of what I want to do, and we have a better plan. And the product doesn't sell itself, but we thought it was, but it took a lot more effort than we thought. So our learning was, we didn't understand the restaurant, how it operates in the financial model, and how we fit into that equation. Education. So we say education was key to success in a lot of different ways. Number one is, since we're bringing in a product that some of it was not really normal kind of food in today's environment, how are we going to educate these people what this product is, how to use it, how to cook it, how to store it, all that kind of thing? We probably weren't as prepared as we thought we were to do that. We could have easily created an advisory group that would, from start to finish, would help us out. So it could be somebody up in Alaska saying, "Hey, Jim, these guys are getting ready for this season. You need to start, getting everybody else ready down there, because if we're gonna move this product through, and we're gonna build passionate consumers, here's a way to do that." That would have been a wonderful conversation to have. Measuring performance, and I think this kind of goes to what Jeff was just saying. It's about, did we measure performance? Did we interpret that results? And do we drive it into a better process, either around product or delivery, or a better mission, a better culture? And sometimes you hit these walls, and you make a harder pivot. But at the very minimum, you should be doing this on a daily basis. We're big fans of that today. We didn't wait for the world to make us successful. However, we could have done a lot more planning to be successful. And there's a lot of stakeholders, which we'll talk about in the next slide, that really we didn't give them a voice. And if we had given them a better voice, it would have made us better. So what are we advocating here? From idea, from the time you create an idea through concept, there's a better way. Advisor, mentors, guides, who understand, who care about us, want to be our champions, understand some of the areas we're in. We should have spent a lot more time trying to bring them onto our team. It would have made a huge difference. And that's what a pitch is all about. And a pitch is also, I think, a lot of times it's really scary for those of you who've done it, or if you're getting ready to do it. There's a lot of reasons that make it scary. But what we forget about is it should be a conversation. It shouldn't be. It's not a teacher standing at the front of the class, trying to drill you. You should be able to hold your own and cleanly and clearly and concisely, talk about your subject. But it's also about getting feedback and interpreting that feedback. A written plan, I think, is I can't say enough about that. It can be everything from what our mission is. And by the way, plan to rewrite it several times as you go along, because that's how you improve a business, right? And improve what you're doing.
Jim, can you talk a little bit about what are the elements that a written plan should contain?
I can, and in fact, if you don't mind, let's save that until we go to our next one.
Perfect.
I think we have a slide in here that says, at a minimum, we can say this is what a pitch should have, but we should also have. It's also what your plan should have in it, and in fact, if we save that one as we start to talk, I'm gonna also let Jeff chime in on that one. And I think James would have some ideas as well on, for all the companies he deals with, even what's in it, these are the basic components of what you would have in there. But it's a great question.
Perfect.
And I think under phase 3, I don't know if Julia has been able to join us yet, but when we put document, test, and improve, that was based on comments when she looked at this test. And it was exactly what you just said, Jeff, about testing that market, understanding how it reacts to it, and then, either changing something about your product or your delivery or your message or how you talk to somebody. And that should be very iterative. And if you do that, it just, your chance of success goes way up. So listen, learn, create. And so back to why develop a thesis? To win the relationships that are going to make you successful. So I'll stop here. Questions? Okay.
So I have a question actually for Jeff maybe. So when we're kind of talking this plan and especially that document, which occurs throughout, and to piggyback on some of the conversation we've already had on testing, what do you look for in a pitch in terms of stated risks and assumptions? Is that something you expect, or what do you expect to see along the lines of those things?
Yeah, for me, I mean, we're such an early stage investor that we're taking. We know there's a ton of risk in these things, but what we try to suss out is, are we taking product development risk, or are we just taking execution risk? And I think for most VCs, even in the early stage, you're trying to mostly take execution risk. And so, the whole angel and kind of friends and family market exists to, kind of get you to the point where you can test a few things. Maybe you're a business founder and you need a software engineer to do some work, and you decide to outsource that, or maybe you have a buddy that needs to get paid that you bring in full-time right away, whatever that is. But that basically allows you to get to the point where you can where you can test out a few of these things and see if there is a market. Will somebody buy this? Well, if it's it depends on what the product is. If it's a social media product, will people actually go on? How often are they using it? If it's an e-commerce business, are people willing to actually buy your product and use it? And so, you generally, by the time you go to VC, even if it's early stage, we're about as early stage as it gets. Even when you come to us at the seed stage, we want something there. We want something, and we're willing to take the execution risk all day long. And that's where you get to this founder market, kind of fit there, just saying, hey, is this a founder we're willing to get behind? Because if he or she can execute, we think this is a massive, market. And so that's really it. It's this notion of, development and product risk versus execution risk. And mostly by the time you get to what we call early stage institutional guys like us, we want to take only execution risk, not complete product risk. So there's now, again, that doesn't have to be a ton there, but there has to be something that says somebody wants to use or buy this product.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
What would be enough? What would be enough proof?
It's in the eye of the beholder. I mean, really, every fund will give you a little bit of a different answer. We've personally with our fund if it is a direct to consumer product, we want some amount of purchases. And frankly, if you look at the e-commerce market, it's just multiples down the line of compressed. I could go into a whole thing there, but it's a little bit more. You know, a lot of times people are first coming to us with a seed investment where they're doing 50,000+ a month, right? On an enterprise software deal, that would be a lot. Like usually it would be more $10,000-$15,000 a month to start going to the seed groups. And then there's a few obscure, cases where we've backed somebody who is so unique from a technology standpoint that you've kind of done it before there's been any scale. For instance, we backed a company called Mighty Buildings, which is this trying to build 3D, homes out of 3D printers and ultimately full office buildings and so forth. That team is so uniquely positioned to be able to do that. And frankly, by the time they started building homes, it would be way beyond where we would reasonably enter as a fund. And so occasionally on these kind of really, really hardcore engineering or specific knowledge, you'll see that a lot in pharmaceuticals and so forth. Then you're betting that this person you're betting on their talents, that there's such a finite number of people out there that can do this thing that you're willing to make a bet.
And Jeff, you talk about early stage institutional investor. What comes before you?
Yeah, that's generally, look, there's accelerators and there's incubators, and then you have this whole world of angel investing, and you have these groups that have tried to professionalize angel investing, and then you have your friends and family. But this is part of the challenge that with venture tending to come from a very specific looking, startup founders that have reached success tend to look very similar, and in the everybody says, oh, everybody's putting everything on the line and taking a shot. Well, the reality is most people come from pretty affluent backgrounds that start companies, and that's because if you have wealthy family members and you want to take you can pull together 250, 300 grand. It's not a big deal. Somebody will toss that to you to take a shot on this thing. But if you're from a group that does not have access to that, then it gets really challenging, because frankly, these professionalized angel groups and so forth, and even the accelerators, they're all getting far more risk averse than this was, 12, 15 years ago when I kind of first started in this business. And so the accelerators are going to all the VCs first saying, would you invest in this thing what traction points, et cetera, et cetera. And they're kind of getting this downstream, this downstream confirmation that there's at least a chance here, because that's, they're taking these risks so early. And so it's really hard if you don't have access to, and then the angel groups are, for the most part, just almost plopping onto the seed stage rounds and just carving out little bits there. And they're not actually terribly accessible, a la like the New York Angels, or there's the group that started Next Gen, right, which started in kind of DC area and so forth. And they're doing some stuff, but those guys, they're showing up in rounds that we're doing as seed stage investors for the first time. So I think that's the biggest challenge to creating access to a much broader group of startup founders is you got to find ways to get capital that people from wealthy background, people who have wealthy friends and family members that they get, because that is what comes first.
Yeah, and I would add a little bit to that, and I'll ask James a question. So in this ecosystem, right, the ag ecosystem, there were people there like the state of Alaska who were willing to make some investments to seed, trying to develop this marketplace, right? So that was a government kind of intervention. There probably would have been more funds available from either fishermen who would like to get a higher price because they're selling more to the marketplace, or to a producer, or even a restaurant, right? But we didn't, this was before there was the concept of venture, so we didn't go through that. But there's a, depending on the area you're going in, James, you want to talk a little bit about what you see in the government world on capital available to start companies?
Sure. So what I think is a relatively new initiative, really taken off in the last 2-3 years, but especially in this year, there's been a lot of movement on that, is the effort to partner with non-traditional defense contractors. I'm in the defense contracting world, so The perspective is a little unique in military versus other agencies of the government, but I do think it's happening all over federal government, and in some cases, a lot of state and local governments as well, is an initiative to, in ways, sort of copy the VC model and take a pared down version of that to do kind of a government version of incubators for non-traditional defense contractors, startups, small businesses that kind of toe that line between small business and startup that have innovative and interesting ideas that the government can benefit from. In the Air Force, there's an organization called AFWorks right now that hosts its own version of Pinch Days. It's got its own version of an incubator. And right now that, listen to pitches from several different startups and companies, and then they're willing to seed money for that. And a big difference there is the dollar values are probably smaller than a lot of angel investors and VCs, for instance, but there's no strings attached to that money. Government doesn't expect a return on the investment, so it's closer to a grant than seed capital in the more traditional sense. And that's just one example, but there's a lot of resources out there that if that's something that kind of fits your model, you can start the research on that. And a lot of those resources also help you, whether you're going to partner with government or not. It's a great starting point for things like market research, which we'll get into in a little bit.
Okay, that's great. Well, I'm going to move along. I understand Julia has joined us, so welcome. Julia, you want to take 2 minutes and tell everybody who you are? And
yes, and I'm so sorry to be late. I am a relentless entrepreneur. Sometimes I wish I wasn't. I wish I could be in the stage where you actually make money, not the stage where you're creating things. But I'm not rich. My family's not rich, and I've had 2 successful startup experiences. So there's a lot of different ways to hustle it at the beginning if you have the right product and the right idea. So happy to be on the call.
Great, thank you. And then if we did, Julie, I don't know if you got on, but I was trying to mention, when you went through this, you said, hey, I recognize a lot of the issues that came out of this. And we're talking about the importance of documentation and market research and things like that. So please feel free to pitch in at any point.
Great, thanks.
All right, so we'll move through this. We want to leave time for Julia to pitch her company. And again, this is not to judge her or to judge the pitch, but it's to show the confidence it takes to do this, right? And how you might organize your story. There's no one right way to do it. This is your story. So James, you want to take it?
Sure. So we'll move through these fairly quickly, but I think a really good thing to emphasize is that the general idea most people picture when they're thinking pitch, right, is that kind of milestone where they're pitching to an investor. But realistically, your pitch is a conversation or dialogue that occurs between you and all of your stakeholders or your multifunctional team as you're engaged in the startup process. So a good way to think about a pitch in general is, how do you incorporate questions and feedback from all those communities, and then how do you tailor it to the individual group or person that you're talking to for that? So to kind of go around the circle really quickly, as the manager, you're going to be engaging and working with all of these groups, and probably a natural first place to start is identifying customers, right, and engaging with those customers. What differentiates you from potential competitors? Is there something new and novel? And can you get interest from customers? Or if it's something that's in an existing market, can you convince them that something about your approach or your business in general can encourage them to work with you over competitors? Similarly, communities. You want to be able to discuss the impact that you're having with those communities. Are you bringing new business in? Are you increasing opportunities with existing businesses through your startup or your venture? And what value can you bring to the company or to the community? And can you use that value as part of your discussion with those other groups? Suppliers, if you're in a startup idea that involves a supply chain, again, likely they have established lines of business and relationships. If you're going to disrupt those, what do you bring to that conversation? And can you discuss the concerns and challenges that they may have while working with you? Advisors, this can be a formal and informal process, right? And as Jeff talked about a little bit, depending on where you come from, you may have natural access to a lot more advisors for free than other people may have. But it's kind of groups like this where you can plant roots, network, and find advisors in the informal process that can help challenge your pitch as you're developing it. And also, you include those responses in to have a more whole concept of whatever your pitch may be. Also importantly is employees. If you're starting out by yourself, this may come a little bit later, but you probably, as a more high-risk venture, have to convince employees why it's worth their time and their own personal investment to work with you. And then finally, investors and debt providers, that's formally what Jeff may be, but I think his comments, and maybe Julia, you can add some of your own experience here too. I would say that early investors, if you don't have access to familial kind of support, can be from places like small business agency or the grants from government and universities, working with banks and other kinds of community partnerships to get started in some of that. But I don't know, thoughts from anywhere else in the group there?
I have some thoughts. I think early on you're trying a couple things. Is when you're talking to customers, it's really around listening, and even suppliers is really listening for their problems that your product may solve. So it's almost as much about listening than it is about sort of getting a reaction to your problem, because you may not have the right solution yet. And so what are the things that they're struggling for? What are their pain points? And so you can think about how your product can meet them. And then the investor advisor thing, I think, is really almost the fun part of it, because it's always been, okay, I know people, like I have a network, like they may not be the right people, but every time at the beginning of a venture, I see it as an opportunity to re-engage with the people I know. And it may be from a long time ago, but one, it helps you talk about your idea. Where do they ask questions? Like, what am I not articulating well? But you don't know who they know. So it sort of just becomes this game around, it leads you to different relationships that you may not have known were part of your broader network. And at the same time, you get to reconnect with people that you liked or had met at different parts of your life. So it takes time, but in some ways, if you look at it as a fun way to reconnect with people you know, it can have those positive effects too.
Yeah, I would add on that. I'm particularly fond of many of the advisors that I work with, and they tend to be very trusted relationships I've built over a long period of time. Yeah. And they mean a lot. So I have, especially in the region where a lot of you are, I have a few attorneys, one in particular that often does things like this with me. And when I find an opportunity and we start to put evolve it into from an idea into a concept, I'll include Chris in those discussions. And as we start to pull together, first of all, he's very critical of my work, which is good. That improves it. But second of all, if he says, "Hey, Jim, I think this is somebody we can take it to that might have an interest in supporting this project," they listen to him. He's got a relationship with them. And I would never get a chance to talk to those people if I didn't have an introduction. And so those introductions, there is a relationship between that advisor and investor that is really important.
Okay, great.
Yeah, the only last thing I'll add to that for 2 seconds just on advisors is, we see a lot of our companies come to us all the time and say, "Hey, look, we want to bring on this advisor, right? So-and-so is the expert, top of their field, exactly what we're doing, can open doors, et cetera, et cetera." And in the typical way to compensate advisors, if they're more business, is via stock option grants, right? A little bit of equity for doing that. But generally, startups aren't in the place to start paying advisors and so forth, like bigger companies. But is what I find is most of those advisors kind of flame out, because they're this big, large resume on there, but at the end of the day, they want to kind of add to that resume and say they're working in the startup community, et cetera. They don't actually want to get down and do a lot of the deep work to help you. And so my advice to everybody when you're going to get an advisor is optimize more. Obviously, you want them to have a network that's unique to yours and can be helpful to you, but optimize for the individuals that are going to actually spend the time, and hold your advisors feet to the fire a little bit. Here are my expectations. I want you to meet with me once a week on this day for an hour, right? Or whatever it might be. Because if you don't do that, all of a sudden you have all these fancy people on your deck that are providing exactly no value to you. And you get 4 or 5 of those individuals, and all of a sudden you've given up a % of your company, right, to bring those people on, and they're not overly helpful. So I love the idea of advisors. They can be fantastic, but you need people that are going to work for you, not just kind of somebody who looks shiny on your website or in a pitch deck.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. The one thing I would probably challenge you on a little bit, the 2 advisors that you really need, especially when you get to a certain size, is good legal counsel, and typically you're going to need an accountant of some sort. So those I almost always bring in, but you're absolutely right. And I happen to know some of the people on this call, and they do a lot of work with VCs. And they're very, it's not easy to get them to work with you, because they work with startup companies or companies that are coming out, because they're not, these are guys that are in the marketplace all the time. They're not going to just go work with anybody. They're very discriminating. That's great. All right, should we move on?
Yes. I have a question, but I'm going to hold it. I'm going to hold it for the end.
Okay, good.
Okay. Go ahead.
James. I was going to say, Juliana, this is some of the stuff that should be in your business plan as well. So I was just going to tie it to your earlier question.
Perfect.
And so we'll move through this pretty quickly, because I think there's maybe more value of seeing some of this in practice. But just to highlight a few points here, your pitch is going to be centered around some of those top things. How does your business model differentiate from what's already existing, or what are you disrupting for that? And so that's centered around an opportunity and the value you bring to it. But to understand those things, you have to have an understanding of the existing or potential future market first. And I think the more in detail you research and can talk to that, the better you are to eloquate your business model and the value that you have. And then the last thing I would add to this is a very important part of any pitch is the ask. So in that current status, you're probably looking for more than just validation. You might be looking for funding. You might be looking for, that advisor to formally join. You might be looking for clients to sign on to whatever you may have. So it's important to make sure you clearly state that, so who you're talking to understands what you're looking for and can provide that feedback back to you. So on this, I will ask Jeff a quick question. A popular term is lean startup. So, what to you it kind of meets the minimum requirement, and maybe another way to look at it is, in a pitch deck, what do you see or hear that almost immediately turns you off, or kind of makes you want to discard whatever comes afterwards from that pitcher?
Specifically around the ask?
I think around the initial part of the pitch and then the ask, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said at the outset, it's generic terms, and hopefully it helped me explain it. But the founder market fit and the product market fit stuff is super important. You spend a lot of time on it, and frankly, it's if you don't get past that, it's not worth really looking too much beyond that. But the big thing on the ask, right, is I find two broad mistakes. One is, and I know it's hard, and I look at all these things I appreciate. I've been through it on the other side. I get it all. It's really hard stuff. So I just say these things as, instructively on how I know, kind of our world looks at stuff, not overly critically. But the two things I think should absolutely not be done is these very broad ranges on an ask, right? I'll have somebody pitch me their whole thing, and then they're like, I want between $2 and $5 million, right? And like $2 and $5 million is a big range. There's a huge difference at each range of that. And so, that's not to say it's not okay to be willing to take more money and know you can do more. But some of that goes back to you also need to do the research on the VC that you're sitting down with, or the investor. Like, what kind of checks do they write, right? And that information isn't perfect, but it's out there, free Crunchbase resources. So like Crunchbase isn't perfect, but they're pretty good, and you can do some research. And so, where I might do a $2 million lead, a $2 million round, like I would tell you at 5, I can't touch it, right? So you need to understand that. So these big broad ranges. Now it's okay to, the better play is ask for a little less. And if you get some momentum behind that and more people want to come in, you can kind of always come in later and say, hey, look, we've got demand for 3, 4. We've got a business, we can alter our business plan to do these things, and we can actually use that money. That's much better than starting with this broad range. And then the other one is just asking for, far more money than the stage that you're at right now, right? I get a lot of groups that are just kind of getting out of the gates and have got some decent momentum going. Maybe it's an e-commerce company that's getting some pretty good sales, moving product at a turning over product, and you're like, hey, we're actually having trouble stocking product and we need money for that. But all of a sudden you'll see a $10 million ask or something, and so if you're asking for an amount where the things you need to be able to do with that amount are just so far from where you're at right now, that's pretty tough for people to get your head around. They want to understand, like, great, you've got this initial product market fit. That's awesome. You want a couple $1 million to hire a few people to restock inventory. If it's still working at that rate, once you're going through that, people are going to be standing ready to give you a whole heck of a lot more capital if it's continuing to scale. But if you're trying to get it all done, and I hear a lot like, well, I just don't want to go out and raise twice, and I get it. Raising sucks. Like, raising money is the worst experience oftentimes, because you really are knocking on 100 doors to get maybe one positive answer. But but you can't overshoot where you are at the stage of the business. That'll be over really quickly for you, even if you have a great pitch.
Okay, so I'm gonna I'm looking at the time, and I'm feeling like we're gonna crunch Julia. So I'm gonna go through these next 2 slides really quickly. I think one of the things is that I see a lot of reasons people don't connect is because they don't understand their market very well, right? And or they don't understand the relationship with it, or a lot of the trends on the market. Is it growing? Is it going up? Is it going down? And by the way, it's become a lot more interesting in this COVID world, right? Because have we hit bottom? Are we recovering in this area? But if you're trying to serve a restaurant right now, God bless you, right? That's just a difficult place. So that market is extremely important. And I think we talked quickly about this basic economic model, because we're going to lose people. We got. I think this is here. Why don't we go to Julia? If I get out of this, can you share yours and do your pitch very quickly?
I can. I'll speed through it. I'll do 1 sentence per slide. Okay. See if it'll be a challenge.
It'll be a challenge, but thank you for doing that. I just don't want to lose sight. I think it's one of the most important parts. So
Jim, if I may, one thing I'll just add real quick, because we didn't get to address it. a great resource I want to plug for some of that starting economic model and your market research is the Small Business Administration, SBA.gov. If you go to that site and you don't have other resources, that gives you a ton of information, steps, and resources to begin that process. So I just want to give a quick plug for that. So thanks.
Yep. Julia, now if on
Can
the
you see
bottom,
my?
I don't see your screen.
Don't worry,
Okay.
I'm adding it. There it is.
There it goes. It's popping up.
Is it? Are you? So now I'm not.
I can see it.
You can.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, not that. I want to present. Okay. Age vibrantly. Let's see. How do I go? I'm at the end. So, all right. So this is the problem. It's a $450 billion problem, and it's called long-term care, something that none of us want, but it's the silent killer of retirement dreams. So 50% of retirement plans, middle-income retirement plans, fail because of long-term care. And 10% of us have insurance against these very high costs that happen at the end of life. And the rest of us, we're just crossing our fingers and hoping it works out. So Bellbird provides an alternative. It's simple, smart alternative to long-term care. Instead of a 6 weeks process, online enrollment, instead of a complex benefit that I really don't think I want, you get cash, and then it's smart. So data-driven really meets people with where they are, and based on their data, provides evidence-based risk mitigation so that they don't need it, but that they're also protected if they do. Powered by data and annuities. So annuities are the insurance. We make money by bringing together the risk mitigation plan that sits on top of the insurance. And this is what you get. So this is an example, $100 at 50, you get, $15,000 to be able to modify your home so you can stay in it longer and not end up in a nursing home. And then you get 10 years of extended care when you're 85. So strong consumer demand. This product has been market tested by the Society of Actuaries. And you can see price purchase intent. This is at $100 a month. 48% of people said they would buy it. So our opportunity here is, this is our market. So 70 million adults. You can see the demographics below. We charge a subscription fee, so $7 billion market. And we're selling it out of the gate to employers through their benefit brokers. Employers, it's easy for them, friction-free election, so no fees, no regulation, no risk on their side. This is the market. There's a number of startups in this space. The trick is, how do you really reach the market? So making the product simple and affordable, and then really to be able to provide personalized value, and that's what we do. This is the team. So I've started and built Medicare Advantage plans. I'm a founder of 2 successful sort of health tech startups. My technical co-founder, and then a marketing sales co-founder who I worked together with my last company. And our advisors are experts in this space. And Vince Bodner is the chair of the group at the Society of Actuaries who market tested the product. And he's been helping us develop the underlying model. So this can be big. This is a $1 billion company. And again, biggest opportunity here is awareness and getting it out there. But you can see where we get in 3 years. This is our fundraise timeline. Right now, we're raising concept to customer. This requires some revenue to get off the ground. And this is a description of the use of funds. So,
wonderful. So first of all, I want to say thank you for doing this in front of a group you don't mean, and I think you did a great job. And so Juliana, we got a few minutes left, or 30 seconds. Sorry for running over, but thank you for your time. You're on mute, Juliana. I can't.
Sorry. It's okay. And if it's okay with you guys, we can go over a little bit because I think talking about business plans and business modeling is really important. Is that okay?
I think that's fine.
Awesome. But before we look at that, I want to give the individuals that are with us on StreamYard an opportunity to ask questions. So Naomi, I'm going to put you in and give you the opportunity to ask your question directly. And if you're unable to unmute yourself, I will read it out loud. In the meantime, I actually would love to kickstart us with a question I got on Facebook, which I think is very relevant, actually. So it's I'm a first generation. I really don't have networks of wealth, and I don't know how to do a friends and family round, which is needed to prove traction. When I try and recruit advisors, I experience a lot of racism. And honestly, this is a question I really want to give space to because I want to take, I must highlight the privilege in this call, right? So I am an immigrant, I am Latina, but I'm very white presenting. And the truth is that privilege comes in many forms beyond economic, right? So even if you grew up poor, right? If you walk into a room and the investor looks like you, they're more likely to relate to you and to feel comfortable with you than if that isn't the case, right? And that's one of the reasons that Black female founders get such little funding. Right? I think it's 0.03% last time I checked. That's real, right? Most investors are white men. Most investors are in Massachusetts, California. They're not in Topeka, Kansas. They are not Black. They're not women. And that needs to change, right? But my question to you guys in the room, especially to Jim and Jeff, is how can we change this, and how can we use our privilege to do that?
Jeff, you want to start, or you want me to?
Go ahead. That's a big, heavy one. So go on, Jim.
First of all,
tackle first.
Thank you for the question. Right, I think you are bringing to the stage a problem that's been out there forever. When I'll speak from some personal experience. When I first went to Alaska, and I had no money. I walked the docks, got a job in a processing plant, and I was working there. And long story short, I was made foreman after about 60 days. I had no education, nothing else, going for me. And there was this beautiful lady who was part native, who basically educated me from the top to the bottom. And what was unspoken about this was she had all the skills to have my position, but she was never going to get it. And I don't think we understood the racism that really existed in that society at that point. So I think about her all the time, and what she did for me. And I think we have to acknowledge that it does exist, and it can't be broken down without a vigilant kind of approach to try to find different ways to do this. So one thing I see a lot of is this is why I like the concept of that I am not an expert in, but maybe something for the future, Juliana, is the future of the focus on impact investors now, because there's a whole group of people that I've met here in Denver as I've moved back to take care of aging parents that really try to tackle these things head on. And they also invest in a lot of smaller companies. They invest in women-owned companies. They invest in companies that are tackling problems that aren't necessarily about profitability, and they're really passionate about it. So I hate to speak on their behalf because I think they're really passionate people. I would also say there's some other entities out there that I have a lot of appreciation for. So James has mentioned the SBA, but there's a lot of government entities that are out there that are a source out there. But there's also things like United Way, right? If you're a not-for-profit and you're and you need money and you need help, that can be a source. And if you take the time to volunteer and get to know these people, you're going to find they're incredibly well educated and they understand these issues very well. I think I love your question. I don't think I'm the best person to represent a great answer for it.
Yeah, I'll pipe in real quick. I mean, look at the short answer is there's not a smoking gun to this thing. It's going to change over a long period of time, and it's going to require a lot of people wanting to see change. And I think we're starting to see that. The first step is it's been fair, the call out of white male that are running these firms has been pervasive now, and people demanding, went from, hey, look at this, to now people are starting to demand change. And so you are seeing, a host of firms pop up that are run by minority investors, female investors, et cetera, that are focused entirely on a specific group of funding that is funding founders that don't look and feel like the existing founders today necessarily. And so you're seeing that happen. And I think I saw some stats the other day that it's moving in the right direction, at least in, the partnerships amongst the biggest, baddest firms on Sand Hill Road to, just upstart funds getting funded. And so it's going that way, but it's not there. It's not going to be there in 2 years. It's not going to be there in 5 years to where everybody would expect, kind of the mix to look like. But, the first thing is to identify that this is out there and put a lot of effort into moving it. And I am seeing that, start to happen. And so those are positive signs, but there's a lot of work to do in the space.
Yeah, definitely. And Jim, you mentioned impact investors, and there is a notion that impact investors are not as lucrative as traditional investors. And I'd love if you guys could speak to that briefly. Also, from what I've seen, because people of color and women tend to operate in uncrowded spaces, oftentimes they prove out to be more lucrative investments than when you invest in a traditional crowded market, because the problems they're solving are problems that many are overlooking. So sometimes the return is higher. Just when you look statistically speaking, when you invest in a woman, your return is higher than when you invest in a man, and that has nothing to do with performance, but I think it has to do with just the problems that I think women are able to identify, and quite frankly, just it takes a lot of grit, right, to be a woman in tech, for instance. And I know, Jim, you worked in IT briefly, but can you speak about the just that notion? Is that real? Are impact investors less lucrative, and why? Yeah, I don't want to look at philanthropy has a role to play for sure, but Black and brown and women entrepreneurs are not charity. They are out there to make you money. And quite frankly, according to the data, they make you more money than your traditional Harvard white guy graduate, right? So why is it that they struggle to get money much more so? Is it networks? Right. And of course, I know this isn't your expertise, but just briefly, that's I've seen a lot of questions pop out, and I wanted to summarize them into one single one.
Well, I think it's what you're bringing out is probably a great panel in and of itself, right? And I'm probably not the right guy to represent some of these things, but I do. I have a couple people. Well, I have an advisory board, and they tend to be people that I really trust, and they've been very accomplished people. And a couple of them are impacted, what they call themselves impact investors. And what does that mean to them? But here, I want to point out one thing before I go into that. I want to point out one thing from the standpoint that when I started that little business, Chinook Seafoods, there was no concept of venture. PE was just getting started, private equity, and impact. And the point is that these things have evolved very quickly into, institutions and processes and ecosystems that are fairly well understood. So the point is in your lifetime, some of the things we're talking like impact or family office or things like that are growing and becoming more mature, and maybe they'll meet the need better. And they will if you have the conversation, right? And you continue to have the conversation. But the impact investors that I know personally, these are very successful people that have managed great, careers in and of themselves. A lot of them start out as immigrants, right? They have their own story. That's a wonderful story to listen to. But what they've done is they've said, I did PE for 10, 15, or 25, 30 years actually, and made a ton of money, but now I want to make a bigger impact to the society. I'm worried about my grandkids. So I've changed my focus so that I'm trying to invest in things that have a bigger impact to overall society. That doesn't mean they're not successful. They're incredibly successful. They're so successful that they've evolved as people, and they're giving back, and they're trying to give back in a meaningful way. So I would certainly I don't have anything more than anecdotal evidence of that, but I think they're wonderful people, and they will continue to again, 10 years ago, if you said I'm a green investor, people would laugh at you. But how many people are green investors now? And then that's a very meaningful statement. So those things can change.
And so the Social Capital Markets Conference that is usually in San Francisco every year is amazing. And even to volunteer, you can attend every single session, and from a networking perspective, it's beautiful. It's a nice way to meet impact investors, and it's huge and fun, and just inspiring.
Thank you, Naomi. I want to give you the floor. Naomi's one of our participants, and she has a question she'd like to ask.
Hi, I have a cold, so I'll try to speak as clear as possible. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, so I started a company called VC Connector, which is trying to resolve the issue what Juliana mentioned earlier, which is connecting women and minority startup companies with venture capitalists and accelerators who can sponsor their business. What I keep on getting is that I work as a product manager professionally, so I'm about I went to a couple of companies pitching, and they said hey, we want a full-time investor and a startup founder, but I have to support myself because I don't have any fundings yet, right? So I'm trying to save money and working on that. But I keep on going in LinkedIn, try to contact as many as people as day and night. I spend minimum 3-4 hours trying to connect, but I don't receive any connections. And as a new startup founder, how do I meet these investors? Because especially what I would like to get is from women founders or women successful, entrepreneurs to make a warm introduction to other investors, because I think this is a real challenge for the country, and it's all over the world. I mean, like, especially in this country. And I hear that a lot of companies are saying that, yeah, we want to encourage Black and minority founders. But I attended the other day a meeting, and they said that they haven't seen the money yet. So, like, people are saying, and it is very challenging to meet people. And I mean, like, how do I'm a new startup founder. I have this great idea. It's going to solve a problem. But like, how do I meet people who are going to like really mean what they say and help those people?
Yeah, I'm sure you all get a lot of LinkedIn messages. What separates the messages that you answer and the messages that you're just like, nah, I'm not even?
Well, it's a great question. So
because Jim answered my LinkedIn message. Just putting that out there.
I think I'm the common denominator here on these people, and so it's kind of worth maybe talking about how did I meet these folks, and why did we start a conversation, right? And I would say, Juliana, I do not get. My life is construction, so I don't get dozens of LinkedIns a day, because I have to focus on my world too, right? I work probably 12 hours a day trying to, put my businesses together and things like that. But I'll start with Jeff. Jeff and I were introduced through an advisor. So Jeff's out here moving back to Colorado, trying to build a network. He was talking to somebody who I'm talking to about a potential investment, and he made the introduction. And so we went and had coffee and found, and this was just recently, last couple of weeks, and had a great conversation. And because there was a meeting of the minds and things like that, we did start to trade other folks that might be beneficial to our own networks. James, I met through his mom, and so that's a little bit special there. So I'll leave that one from there. But it is nice. I would have to say I was not military, right? And so the world James lives in is completely different. And so his world and his ecosystem, I'm constantly learning from what they go through. His brother's also in the military, so we see it from both sides. And the amount of contracts that they work with and the number of companies they interface with is actually at a much bigger velocity than I do. And so I think that's one where for Naomi, that's an area. Do not give up on going at the government side of it. Juliana, you contacted me right after we had done a panel on VC raising with the Founders Institute, right? And one of the guys on there was a Techstar guy named Keith Kamhai, and they just started a longevity program, which is an area of interest to us. And Melissa Gates Foundation funded them. So there's people especially in the DC area, right, with lots and lots of stuff going on, and you have to be persistent. And then Julia, I think you contacted me. We were both had joined a group called the Startup Communities, and I'd put something out there about aging in place and longevity, which is an area we're researching. And you said, I have an interest in that, and we met through that. And the startup community it was created by Brad Feld and a couple other folks, and Brad is a notable VC thought leader in Boulder, and he's putting out a new book on how do you create that ecosystem. So I think you have to think, Naomi, a little bit. There's no easy answers to what you're saying, but I do think I just in the halfway through Brad's book and where he is talking about, and so and I'm not getting paid by Brad. I've known him for many years, where he talks about how to create an ecosystem and how to start to surrounding yourself with lots of folks who have the same passion and ideas, and learn to listen together and start to find opportunities together. And I think if you look at Techstars 10 years ago, you would have seen it as barely anything. And now it's become an incubator all over the world, several hundred countries. So So I would say you need to keep your passion, and I wish I could tell you here's some ecosystems that make sense, but I'm not sure I know what I'm not sure I'm the right person to guide you on this.
I can speak a little bit on this just because I'm doing it now. I found that if it's almost like trying to find the people who are excited about what you're doing, and almost separate it from the fundraising a little bit, because you don't know who they know, and it just helps you know that you're doing the right work. And the hardest part about starting a company is just keeping up the motivation and not thinking you're crazy. And so, it really is okay, this person gets it, and sort of pulling people into sort of the space that you're operating with to be able to build sort of the momentum of the people. And inevitably, if you have enough people who are excited about the same thing that you are, one of them knows somebody who has money. Like the numbers, it's just tedious. And the other book that I read is called something like Raising Capital on Your Own Terms. And I found it very refreshing because it just sort of said, okay, raising money is just like networking. And it just, it's like there's this construct and there's this thing and there is another way. And it just sort of said, okay, figure out what kind of money you need and then start talking to people. And the hardest part is just freaking asking for the money. It's almost like you just have to practice asking and just get over. I mean, everyone's different, but for me, it was like I just had to practice saying it until it just felt comfortable. And I felt, and you just say more and more amounts every time till you start to feel like you can own it. And it's just like you got to put yourself out there. I think that's the hardest part. But if you have a good idea, you can attract people to it. And what you're working on is so important right now. And believe me, there are so many people out there who'd be ready to fund it. It's just, I know it's a slog, but but if you don't think of it that way, it's like, I want to find my people who see the world like I do, who see this problem like I see it, and the money will come. So it's really just a game in some sense to find sort of the people who have that same level of passion, and somebody in that group has money. The law of numbers.
Julie, I'm so happy you brought that up. One of our lecturers is Jenny Casson, the author
of
good. Capital in Your Own Terms. And I'm a huge fan of investment crowdfunding for that very reason. I think it opens up the world to more equity. You have to get really good at rejection. I would say that if you really want to get over rejection, sign up to do Get Out to Vote registrations and just start knocking. And see how many times you can get the door slammed in your face. Is the goal, right? If you can get through 200 doors asking people to register to vote in a nonpartisan way, just register to vote. Or do it for the environment, or do it for issue specific, right? Whether it's for senatorial or whatever, you'll get over rejection real fast. I would also say that you have to prove attraction. When you're reaching out to people, you have to prove some level of traction, and don't just write everyone who has a title investor. Make sure they're investing in companies like yours, and look at companies that they have invested in the past.
Yeah, guys, I'll fill in here because I am the guy who gets simply because my name, my title on LinkedIn says investor, right? I probably wake up every morning to anywhere between 20 on a light day and 50 on a heavy day, just random notes from people I've never met. And I think that's pretty common amongst these. It has nothing to do with me. It just has that everybody's trying to reach out to people, right, and get introductions. And I've just kind of made a note of I tried to go through them all and read them and understand them early on. And I found out it was spending 3 hours a day going through just stuff, trying to understand it. And so kind of made, just a self deal of just saying, look, if I know somebody and I've been introduced to them and whatever, and I see that, their name pop up, then great. Otherwise I can't go through. So I would highly recommend you not to go out and just kind of cream LinkedIn to try to get introductions. Andreessen Horowitz is very famous for saying, and you can take this how you want, but they do not look at any deals that are not through a warm intro, because they actually think it's reflective of the founder's ability to, hustle and work to find somebody within that network. And that's always been Mark's point, is like, I assure you, if you look hard enough, right, you can find an introduction to us and somebody who believes in you enough to kind of make the introduction. And I think there's a lot of that out there. And I want to get too frustrated with it from the standpoint of that is a function in many ways of just the nature of this business, which is to see, the fact that they know you, people know you invest, whether you're a good VC or a bad VC, you're still seeing, a couple hundred introductions, pitches, etc. a month. And it's hard to comb through that stuff and make sense of it. So you do look for signals, which is, hey, did one of my founders, who is, that I respect a lot, that I invested in, is he or she making that introduction to me? That is, first and foremost, goes farther than anything, because if I know one of our founders who we back is making that introduction, he or she is being very thoughtful about that introduction and making it. So that is the first and foremost. And then, it kind of trickles down the line from there, from, whether it's another VC, whether it's just somebody who's in your network that's a friend and that you trust, and so forth. So it's hard in a non-COVID world. I would tell you, you go through the grind of going to all these free conferences and so forth, and meeting people in person and getting to tell your story in person is infinitely better than trying to do that over email, for sure, or even over a phone, because you just can't make that personal connection in the same way. We're in a weird world where it's gotten harder and harder. Usually there's a conference every 3 conferences a week that you can attend for free. And I think it's like Julia said, you find that person that this story resonates with, and then you kind of latch on and you say, all right, you get it. How can you make those introductions? And so there is no easy, on that front, there is no easy answer. You've got to kind of grind around on that stuff, but also, try to the best of your ability to find ways outside of, kind of cold emails into social networks to get those connections.
I would say the one thing that cold emails has worked for me is when I actually have a legitimate business question. So when I'm like trying to figure out, like, how do I solve this question in my startup? And I'm like, it's for real. At that point, I found that can sometimes be a okay cold intro, because I'm not coming to it for money necessarily. I'm really reaching out to people to be able to sort of ask it like a legitimate question that I'm struggling with. And that has been helpful for me, at least on the cold email front. And some of those relationships have stuck because, you kind of engage the person in your business enough to get to know them. And then at the point where you need to raise money, they're there either to help or at least to be there themselves.
Yeah,
awesome. And I want to get to some questions we have from Facebook. So we can talk more about this, but I really want to ask the Facebook questions.
Okay.
So we're going to do a quick lightning round. I have a question for each of you, pretty much. So Jim, how might you collaborate with your competition from the get-go?
Collaborate with my competition?
So I think this was referencing how in the end you ended up working for the competition. So was there a way that you could have engaged the competition from the get-go and collaborated with them as opposed to competed with them?
That's a wonderful question, and it's wonderful insight. The answer to that is probably. If I had even understood who the competition was, and in many industries that I've had the opportunity to work with, I can tell you we all know each other. And it's pretty rare that we just hate each other. That's not what competition's about. Competition is a lot about respect, right? And hey, you're doing something interesting. I can tell you, I talk to CEOs in the industries I'm interested in almost every week. And we share ideas, and we try to find a better way to do it. And we try to solve problems together, because in most industries, as they're growing, there's room for everybody to grow. And so it really doesn't do anybody value to say, hey, you're my competitor, I'm going to knock you down. It takes some maturity to learn that.
That's awesome. James, so this is about contracting and cash flow. So what resources are there for me as a startup trying to work with the government? I don't have the cash to fulfill the contracts I could potentially get.
That's a great question. So the standard contracting, not great answer is it depends, right? But in this case, I would say from that perspective, it sounds like you're engaging to be a small business. And there are a lot of resources available to small businesses to not quite level the playing field, but increase opportunities with the government. And so the first place I would look for some of that information is my local small business administration liaison for whatever region. And you can look that up online and reach out to them. They have a pretty good outreach process. And then you can kind of discuss from there, what specific opportunities you might qualify for. With the community we're talking here, especially around the DC area, there's a lot of what are called historically underutilized business zones, or 8A businesses. And those will open you up to opportunities to get certain kinds of financing. If you qualify for certain statuses in a government contract, you can actually apply for different kind of payment structures. And especially if in your business you're willing to give some sort of consideration to the government to help your cash flow, that's actually a negotiating tool. And so, the government structure, and not every contracting organization has a lot of knowledge on this and does a lot of good outreach and education. But if you do that yourself and bring it to the table and say, hey, I looked up in the federal acquisition regulation or talked with my SBA representative, and they said, I can qualify for some financing options or progressive payments, or try not to get too specific in the terms, but a faster invoicing cash flow through the government program. You can bring that to the table and introduce it, and a good contracting officer should be very responsive to that, especially if they can see some kind of benefit, maybe a little bit of extra delivery of a product or service. They're usually more than happy, because the government has cash in abundance. We have rules we have to follow, but there's a lot of opportunities for that cash to be paid out a little faster. And then I would also say, if you're able to secure contracts too, depending on the area you're working, construction varies a little bit from development of products, but that should also be able to be used as kind of leverage when interacting with banks and credit unions for some loans. And then the last thing I'll say to that is, if you're really novel and kind of in this startup mindset, again, I would look to DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, Air Force Works, AFWERX, and some of those newer kind of incubator model things that will actually, and another great one is Small Business Innovative Research, that allow for partnerships and understand those kinds of challenges. And so they have built-in mechanisms to get cash really fast, and partnering and funding from the government that almost works similar to how a VC might work on a small scale.
Does the Air Force ever do cash advances for contracts?
So they do. There are rules. So, if you're really interested, it's Federal Acquisition Regulation Part 31, and it talks about contract financing methods.
Sounds like a fascinating document to read, and I can't wait.
If you want to find a way to fall asleep really easily at night, it's about 1,000 pages if you print it out, plus all the supplements. But if you do a quick search on advanced payments, it will tell you the very specific rules of when the government is allowed to do those and how you can qualify. So it is limited, unfortunately, but it is available.
Beautiful. Jeff, when do you bet on talent versus traction?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is the hard part is talent. I'm going to try not to go too deep on this, but talent is always the must, and talent can come in a lot of forms, right? Talent can come from the fact that you've done it before and you've been in that seat and you're somewhat battle tested, whether that was, a failure like Jim's first endeavor that he walked us through here today, or whether that was, on the complete opposite side of the scale, like an Elon Musk, right, who's knocked it out of the park several times. So, I mean, talent can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be that you've been through it. You could have come from, a place where it's, where a lot of, look, there's a reason people spinning out of Google and Facebook and so forth often get funded, because they've kind of seen that culture and how culture scales from a long run. So you get a lot of that, right? And that gets into some of this virtuous cycle on why, founders continue to kind of look the same, because, there's certain networks that people just want to pull talent from. But again, the founder, I can't overemphasize, and it's unfortunate that it's become too cliche, because everybody will kind of throw the term around, but that founder market fit piece of it is so important, right? Again, if you just kind of start a company because you felt like starting a company, versus if it's something you've lived, felt, and the pain that you just, is burning inside you, that it kind of has to be solved, and here's why, and so forth. That stuff's so important. Now look at, like, if the less obvious you are as a founder, right? You didn't come from Stanford and go to Google and so forth, right? Where everybody's going to pay attention to that. But the less obvious you are as a founder, as a, this pedigreed kind of background, probably the little bit more you're going to have to, or you haven't done it a couple times or whatever else, the more you're going to have to prove on the traction point. Because again, it kind of goes back to what I said at the outset there. Once you get to VC, even early stage VC like us, where we truly do invest in, kind of seed type of companies, but by the time you get there, you need to have taken out, we need to be left with this notion of execution risk, right? Where there is some product market fit, there is, there is the, some notable traction that you have in there. And again, it doesn't have to be a ton, but there has to be some, and then we're betting on execution. And so I think that's the difference. We've taken some bets on some founders that were just so obvious on, like I said earlier in the thing that I said, so obvious because they have a technical expertise or an industry expertise that there's just a finite number of people that do. But for the most part, you're looking for somebody who has a really great founding story and so forth, and they have some proven traction points that you can kind of get behind and say, okay, I can start to, for myself, I can build a mental model where I can start to extrapolate how, if this market keeps building like this can be really big. The last thing I'll say on this is that I think one of the big mistakes, one of the hardest thing for founders to kind of grapple with is this notion of not all startups should be VC funded. You can have amazing companies that don't have VC funding, and frankly, 99% of companies started shouldn't have VC funding. And I know everybody's natural instinct is to go to the venture capitalists because they're just the one set of individual funds that have money that invest in startups. But the reality is venture is this weird business where we're really built to bet on home run, home run, home run, home run. And that's why you hear like 50, 60% of these things fail, right? Because if you don't take enough swings and the failure rates are what they normally are, you're never, we're fiduciaries too. We have investors in our funds. We've got to make them money as well. And we're these things are set up, for better or for worse, just to take home run after home run swing, and we know we're going to have huge failure. But if two of them are billion-dollar companies or whatever, then you make that model work. And that's why frankly VC fund failure rate is so high, because a lot of people take these bets, but they're not big enough bets, and when they miss, so it's a weird, hard world to go after. And not like I said, 90+% of companies should not even go the route of VC. And I know that's hard for somebody sitting in the seat of a founder who doesn't know where they're going to find their money. But you're going to hear a lot like, hey, great company, just not made for VC.
Right, right. And you spoke a little bit about how the VC world has changed. Has the failure model changed as well? So early on, it was like a write a check, hair a pitch, write a check. So we get one, right? But as we've seen a lot of very well backed companies start to fail, is that changing? Are your fiduciaries, your LPs holding you a little bit more accountable in that you need more evidence that this company might be a success before you invest in them, or not so much at the stage you're in?
Yeah, for the stage we are, I mean, you know, every fund's different. Are you a startup fund raising your first fund? And I assure you, all founders sitting in your seat, if you are trying to found a fund, you could have the greatest fund idea, and if you're not an obvious person to start a fund, fundraising is miserable, right? Miserable, and every bit as miserable, if almost not more, than trying to start it from a company where you're asking for just much smaller dollar amounts. It's horrible. And so at the end, look, if you can prove the kind of industry expectation from a VC fund is that you can get 3x or more return to your LPs, and that's kind of, you know, the math that says you're in an IRR that they shouldn't just go out and invest in the S&P, right? So if you can produce that, they don't ask a whole lot of questions on kind of how you get there. I have found that our industry is getting more conservative in general, and in terms of waiting a little bit longer to come in, particularly again, if you're not one of these, you know, founders that has been through it 2-3 times and had success, that anybody they ask will throw money at, that people are getting more conservative. And that's a function of the, you know, the good news for the entrepreneur is there is more money sitting in venture capital funds or investors than there ever has and more angel investors than there ever has. And it's sitting here as a fund, that's terrifying for me to see, right? Because on deals that we would have done 10 years ago, we're paying 2-3 times, you know, what we paid, you know, that when I first started out in this business to get into it. But as an entrepreneur, you know, it's an opportunity. And my argument is all that money's still chasing the same small number of deals, and that will be the demise of, you know, many funds, and venture will have its whole reset and so forth. Unfortunately, these firms are so structured to be such long-term things. We're probably a decade out on that demise happening. But you know, it's if you're a founder, there's a lot of funds focused on now very specific niches, whether it's underfunded founders, whether it's very specific verticals of investing and so forth. They're out there, and it is a grind. It is not for the faint of heart, but there is money, and you got to work like hell to go find it.
What is the return that an angel investor seeks versus a VC?
Still a lot. Like, I mean, everybody, you know, I mean, Chris Rose, right? Rose, one of New York's famous guy. I know him reasonably well, and I can't not blanket on his name. Rose. I think it's Chris. Anyway, it's or David Rose. Anyway, he walked through a thing saying, like, if you're trying to make money as an angel, the math is even harder than VC math, because you know, in theory you're even investing earlier, and so, you know, you're going to have this failure rate. And basically, to make money as an angel investor, you need at least you need at least one company to 40x for you. And so that's still, even if you're entering at, you know, Julia put up, you know, a $3 million cap, right? So even if you're entering at a $3 million cap, when you run out that math isn't $120 million, right? It's way more than that, because Julia's going to raise a seed, and then she's probably going to raise an A. And then if this thing's killing it, right, she's going to raise a growth round. And as an angel investor, you're getting diluted along the way the whole time. So a 40x, if you invest in Julia's companies, probably a $500 million plus outcome. And so those if you're trying to make money off of it. Now, not everybody is wired to angel invest to try to get, you know, to make a living out of it. A lot of people have a whole set of standards that they are. And so that's even a group, though, that you have to work harder to kind of get into and understand what everybody's motivation is.
Mm-hmm. Julia, how did you prove traction with your first company?
So my first company, or my first VC-backed company, we proved traction by getting a pilot customer and a tiny bit of our product. So we secured, again, just pilot customer, and our product cost maybe $40 per employee per month. And our very first product was like a tiny sliver of it. But we were selling to employers. So even having a pilot with a small version of our product was enough for us to then build the product around it and be able to get off the ground with that. And then that led to, us to be able to raise money and also attract others.
So how many customers did you have?
It was a little so that company provided, well, it was the health plan to fix America. So it was a health plan for employers who self-funded their health insurance. So we had the pilot customer was a trust of 10,000, but it was one relationship.
Wow.
That's the thing. Like, it was one relationship. One guy I randomly got introduced to. And then later, I'm like, hey, maybe he'll do it. So it just is, it depends on the product. This one, even though we need a fair amount of capital to get the full product off the ground, this month we're releasing almost like a marketing MVP to be able to test the value proposition with the customer. Even though, like, to get the full thing built, it's going to need some more money, but that marketing MVP will be a traction metric. So it really depends on the product, but it's sort of like, what can you get out the door to show that sort of there's interest and value in what you're building, and just to be really scrappy about it, because it may not be it's your full idea. It may be it may just be you're attracting people to your website. It could be a pre-order. There's a lot of ways to do it.
How much money did you raise after having proved you had a customer? And if it's okay that I ask.
No, our first round, we raised $500,000.
And how much money did you have to bring in through that pilot customer to get that $500,000 check?
When we raised it, we were charging $5 per employee per month. So $5 times 10,000 people.
Okay.
Per month.
Okay, guys.
That was a unique. They're a unique product, and to some degree. But.
Yeah, of course. No, but I want to give an example of what is traction and what traction looks like. And if anybody has more ideas of what traction could look like, please chime in, because I think this is a very important question we've been getting.
Well, so here's one way that I think about it. And It has to do with, what is the one thing that if it doesn't turn out, your business will not work? Like, what's that? Like, it's almost like you're trying to de-risk it so that the investor says, okay, like, you show me, like, so for mine, it could be, only 10% of people like long-term care. Like, so what's going to get somebody to buy this? Like, clearly the market has said, we don't want it. So to be able to have some way to demonstrate, and this can, even though we're selling to employers again, a direct to market product, even if it's not to buy the full product, say maybe it's just even for free, we're putting something up there that sort of says whatever, and we're attracting people. And now we have this group of people who's like, okay, so now what do I buy? Like, you've told me what my future health risk is, and it's really bad. And so what do I do? And so that's a free product online that, you really, and then it's pick the metric, the weekly metric. And even if you start with one person, then it's 2, because that's the curve that gets you where you need to be. So it's the curve as much as it is the numbers. So even if it's 1, that's okay. Then go 2, then go 4, like, build the exponential curve, and like, be okay with 1, because you got to start somewhere.
Talk a little.
Yeah, Julia, or Juliana, I think the important thing, Julia, said there is it's so dependent on your business, right? And I touched this a little bit in the outset. If you're selling a consumer product, right? If you're selling jewelry online or flowers online or any of these type of things, right? What defines traction is very different than what defines traction if you're selling to the enterprise customer, like Julia is in these situations, right? Where it is one, if you get, one big name logo enterprise customer to say, yes, that works, you as the investor kind of look at that and say, well, Walmart's probably not the only person in the world that's going to want this thing, right? There's probably, and so that goes a long way. And sometimes even a purchase order. I mean, we've given founders credit for purchase orders all the time, because the likelihood that a big organization defaults on a purchase order is very, very low. Could they back out of a deal or something? They do that all the time. But if they've got a PO signed and so forth, the likelihood is it's good, and the likelihood others want that. If you're selling a consumer product, right, where you need just these fickle consumers who are sitting at home right now, buying anything off of an Instagram ad that they see, that's a little bit of a different story. And so you do actually start getting into some of the even early on as seed funds, and I backed a ton of direct-to-consumer e-commerce companies, and even at the seed round, I am looking at their cohort data and their unit economics and all that kind of stuff, because wherever you are right now at the beginning, it's going to compress by a lot, right? And so if you're sitting at really thin kind of numbers right now, we're going to look at you and say, like, that's you've got to find better channels to prove product market fit, because you simply can't buy your way into customer acquisition the whole way up. It's just never going to work, right? And so, but we always give a lot of credit on consumer products to people who can basically, without spending really any marketing dollars at all, they can generate a whole bunch of interest, and that shows a ton of product market fit. And then you can actually look at, I don't want to get crazy technical on this, but what we would refer to as the viral coefficient, which just says, like, how much are people recommending your product, and you're getting new entrants, over and over again on that. And so that is just a whole different ball game than selling a product to the enterprise, even to selling a product to small, medium-sized businesses, kind of a SaaS product, if you will. It's that grind of acquiring small, medium-sized businesses is just very different than being able to go to the enterprise. But usually you have to start there, because having an enterprise-ready product is, generally just takes some time.
Exactly. And I've seen a lot of people who, even though their long-term goal is one type of business, that actually start with another type of business just so they can prove traction and make their way there. But I'm just going to ask one more question, because I know we've gone over by a lot, and I thank you guys so much for staying over. This one talks about economic models. I am building a dual-sided marketplace. Do you have any advice for how I might create an economic model? I am a creative. I'm not an economics person.
I mean, again, I do think we didn't kind of go through the economic model that we had with the case study. It doesn't have to be difficult to create, a simple model that people understand. This is my basic model. I make X, I sell. Here's my cost, and here's why, and here's what I need to sell to get to break even. I think those are all really important concepts, and in the presentation. That's where, if you go out to sba.org that James mentioned, they have a ton of nice little resources that can help you put that together. And as well as some of those, the SBA often has places you can go to and people you can talk to help you put that together. They do it as a service, trying to do that. But again, a lot of times you're gonna, in my, I can't do a lot by myself, so I have to have a team, and somebody on the team is usually really good at doing that. So it's also having a collaborative team that everybody works together.
I would also say at the beginning, you have to make it up. Like, you just got to put the stakes in the ground. Like, what do I think is going to happen? Just put the numbers down and know what they're based on. And then you start testing your assumptions. And the hardest part is just making it up. Like, it doesn't have to be right. You just got to start somewhere, because that's how you learn. So just make it up.
Can you give us an example of what that might look like?
I mean, you're just like, so you just really look at, so you can do it from two ways. You can either say, what do I need to make it work? So you start at the end from like Jim's perspective, like, what do I need to break even to cover my costs? And so what does that look like? What does my growth need to look like? And you can do it that way. Alternatively, you could just start with, okay, what do I have? What are my current numbers? And what if those numbers moved forward? Like, what does that look like? And you're kind of playing around with them till you get it to something that works. Because if it works, then that's your goal. So now you have a stake in the ground around something. And as your numbers start to come in, if they're off, then you're like, oh crap, like it's not going to work. So what do I have to tweak? Like, which of my assumptions were wrong? But, in the process, it's really like, what are my assumptions? Like, even like, I assume my costs are going to be X. Okay, you may be totally off, but that you're just, okay. And then as you start to figure out your costs, you realize like, oh, wow, like they're twice as high as I thought, so now I'm going to need to grow twice as fast. And can I do that? So I found that the hardest part is just to begin, and it starts to help you understand what you do know and what you don't know. So that you can start to know more.
I'll say something specifically to the two-sided marketplace individual, just because, again, an area I'm fairly familiar with. And so it's, and understand. So one, there's a lot of, if you want to just go find a template online, look at Jim mentioned Foundry Group and Brad Feld, and then First Round Capital, and all these, a lot of these VCs have built up, part of their branding is putting out a lot of content, and that stuff's out there. If you search, marketplace, financial statement, right? You can go onto Etsy, right? Etsy's a publicly traded company, a two-sided marketplace, and just look how they go through that stuff. So there's a lot of just like kind of grinding through the resources out there. But you want to know enough that, like, if you're going to start a two-sided marketplace business, you should know what GMV means, right? And then you should know how that trickles down to your revenue and so on and so forth. So a basic, kind of a basic template, so that at least you're speaking the language. And I agree, it can be raw. Like, everything we look at isn't some polished, deal from a real, from somebody who's an experienced CFO, but they either got a friend to kind of build them out, just a little template, and then let them fill in a number. They kind of went online and found those resources, but certainly just go on and make sure you understand, if you're a marketplace, like, what are those data points that you need to be able to talk coherently around, and then start to fill that in, as Julia said, just start to fill that in and what you think that looks like, and to the best of your knowledge on how this thing's going to play out, and test that. But man, there's the one thing the VC community has done a good job of, and we've done a lot of things bad, but there are a lot of resources out there for founders, and you just kind of have to go on the hunt for them.
Can you explain a little bit what gross merchandise value, GMV, means?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's really just how much money is actually passing through the system, right? That's being sold on your platform. Now, you're only going to get a small percentage of that. You might get 10%, 15%, 20% of that, whatever it might be. But the GMV is just everything that's being transacted on your platform. So if you're Etsy, right, and you're basically just connecting buyers like any of us sitting in this room to makers, right, that are able to, that are sewing something or whatever product they're making, right? I might buy that for $30, that product. That is the GMV of that transaction, right? Now, Etsy's only going to get 20% or 25% of that, or whatever it is. So Etsy's gross revenue off of that is just, that their take rate is generally what it's called. So if they're making 20%, their gross revenue is $6 off of that $30 transaction. So you want to just be able to coherently walk through how much gets transacted on the platform, and then how much of that are you able to capture, and then what are all your kind of expenses below the line.
I got you. And I know I said that was the last question, but I lied. this really is the last one, I promise. But I just think it's so perfect because it kind of goes into this. So my manufacturing is in China, and there are a lot of political risks associated with procuring goods. How might I build in risk into my economic model?
So we've backed a lot of companies that have manufacturing over in China, and I would say, and a lot. Look, first, I would say first and foremost, people are moving most of those facilities. I'm seeing Mexico and even neighbors of China, whether it's Taiwan or I'm seeing some stuff shoot over to Malaysia. Like there's people are moving and finding better people, but you have to have somebody on the ground that you trust that is looking out for your interests. So no manufacturing in China happens without a representative that's there. And there are very good ones that are credible, and there are very bad ones. And first and foremost, you better sure as hell go see those plants and talk to those people. Unfortunately, if you're going to do manufacturing in China, you can't do it virtually, right? And so we can all talk about whether now's the time to, whether you can reasonably do that or not, but that's a whole separate discussion. But you need to be over there on the ground, and every company I know that make goods, are like clothing or anything else that's being manufactured over there has been there. They've met those people. They are really networking hard to talk to other founders that are using that to get sources over there and so forth. And so like you can do that perfectly, and it can still blow up, but it's got a much higher chance of falling apart if you don't go through and do all that work. So look at it, if you're gonna, it's hard to build into the financial model. I think every investor, understands that there is some risk there, and they evaluate it a little bit differently. But yeah, what happens if you're a single source manufacturing plant and that thing catches on fire, which by the way happens all the time. And so forth. And so that stuff's hard. But yeah, you got to get over there. You need to meet these people, and you need to network like crazy with others who are manufacturing over there to get credible sources to go after. Cause that's not an easy game to play from afar.
Any advice on meeting manufacturers? I feel like every person I've talked to who's manufactured has a terror story to share.
Yeah, I would just say there are tons and tons of VC-backed early startups that have done it, right? And I assure you they've done it in your space, whether it's, clothing, industrials, et cetera, et cetera. Go and, speak to 25 people that have done it over there, 15, whatever it is, to get good guidance on that side, because, only the people who have lived it every single day of running their company are going to have really, really sage advice for you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Any last minute advice you want to give?
No, we want to thank the audience, especially those who stuck through here. And I personally want to thank everybody on this call for helping me out. This is so much easier when you put a bunch of smart people in a room with you. So thank you.
I think it's beautiful, Jim, that you were able to bring together so many different perspectives. We have an entrepreneurial perspective, a government perspective, a VC perspective, right? And that is beautiful. That is beautiful. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We have other workshops coming up. One that will actually talk about manufacturing from an entrepreneur perspective who has manufactured sporting goods for quite some time. We also have a workshop that's going to talk about what are the financial indicators you should know, and what do they mean? So that will help answer some of those questions. Just to give everyone a sense of who we are and what we do. So Street Entrepreneurs believes that the people experiencing the problems ought to be the ones solving those problems. So we invest in people that are solving problems they know best and problems they know firsthand. The way that we invest is three ways. One is workshops, right? We typically run these workshops in person. We create workshops with a specific audience in mind. So right now we have 8 cohorts. We have a cohort in consulting, in technology, in handmade products, manufactured products, technology, and the list goes on. And we create custom workshops with each of these cohorts in mind. Because of COVID, we now have the opportunity of going digital and sharing this content with like-minded groups and like-minded accelerators. I would say that we are an accelerator. We are also a nonprofit, but what we actually are is building power. And that to me is the most important piece of everything we do. And it's connecting people like Jim, James, Jeff, and Julia to our entrepreneurs. And ensuring that one day we may live in a world where there is a grit-based economy, and grit is the sole determinant of access to capital, to knowledge, and to networks. And that's the world I dream of. One where people who are crazy enough to imagine a world that doesn't exist have the access they need to solve the problems that matter. So I thank you all for donating your time, for being here, and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So